Alva, Oklahoma, June 1945. The first thing Giovanna Bianchi noticed was the sky. Not the camp. Not the soldiers. Not the flat red earth that stretched in every direction without a hill or a ruin to interrupt it. The sky. It was enormous. Bigger than any sky she had seen over Milan, over the French coast, over the gray Atlantic. It went on past the point where skies were supposed to stop. The truck had been rolling through Oklahoma wheat country for 2 hours. Full silos. Intact roads. Cattle standing in unburned fields. A country that looked like the war had happened somewhere else entirely. Which, she was beginning to understand, it had. Then the camp appeared at the end of the dirt road. She had prepared herself for this. For the wire, the towers, the dogs, the machinery of captivity that everyone who had warned her about the Americans had described in detail. The gate was open. Not broken. Not forgotten. Open, wide, unhurried, like a farmhouse door left open on a summer morning because there was no particular reason to close it. Giovanna stood in the red Oklahoma dust and looked at the open gate and felt the first small crack appear in everything she thought she knew. She had been a librarian in Milan. Before the war, before the auxiliary, before everything that came after, she had spent her days in a building full of books and the particular quiet of people reading. She had been good at her work, precise, organized, capable of holding large amounts of information without confusing it. She cataloged things. She built order from accumulation. She had spent the last 2 years applying those same skills to a different kind of material, to orders and communications, and the specific geography of retreating armies, to the maps that told you where things were and the official communications that told you what those things meant. She had been assigned to a signals and documentation unit of the Servizio Ausiliario Femminile, the women's auxiliary service of the Italian Social Republic. In the autumn of 1943, 6 months after her younger brother Marco left for the front and 4 months before the last letter from him arrived. She had continued working anyway, because the alternative was a space she had no catalog for. The Americans had arrived at the unit's last position, a converted school building outside Verona, on the morning of April 28, 1945, 2 days after the Republic had collapsed in all but name. There were 4 soldiers. They came through the door with their rifles pointed at the floor, and the senior man said something in English that nobody immediately understood. Then a younger soldier translated it into approximate Italian. They were to remain calm. They were non-combatants, and would be treated accordingly. Giovanna had looked at the 4 Americans standing in the doorway of the building she had worked in for 6 months, and applied the same analytical attention she applied to everything. She noted their equipment. She noted their faces, tired, neither hostile nor warm. She noted the way they positioned themselves, practical, not threatening. She filed all of this and said nothing. Rosaria Cani had said enough for both of them. She was 19 years old, and from a village of 1,200 people near Brescia where her family had grown wheat and raised pigs for 3 generations. She had joined the auxiliary at 17 because the recruiters came to her village, and she had seen it as something larger than potatoes and mud, and the same horizon she had looked at her entire life. She believed what the officers told her, completely, without reservation, the way you believe things when you have been given no competing information and no reason to look for any. She believed the Allies were destroyers. She had seen the photographs in the newspapers, the bombed cities, the rubble, the columns of smoke. She had been told who was responsible, and she had believed it because the photographs were real and the explanation was given to her by authority, and she was 17 years old in a village near Brescia with no other framework to put it in. When the Americans came through the door at Verona, she had looked at Giovanna and said in a voice that was almost steady, "Now it begins." Nothing had begun. They were searched, briefly and professionally. Their documents were collected. Their names were written in a ledger. Then they waited, and then they were moved, and then they waited again, and the thing that Rosaria had been waiting to begin did not begin. She was still waiting. In the truck, for the last 2 hours of the Oklahoma journey, she had sat with her hands folded in her lap, and watched the wheat fields through the gap in the canvas, and said nothing. Giovanna had watched her watching. The fields were full and the roads were whole, and the farms had paint on their buildings. Not new paint, not special paint, just paint. The ordinary maintenance of structures that had not been damaged, and therefore could be maintained. Rosaria looked at all of it without expression. Then the camp appeared. Then the gate. Rosaria leaned close to Giovanna's ear and said quietly, "It's a trick." Giovanna didn't answer. Teresa Marino was already walking toward it. She was 34 years old, and she had grown up in Turin in the specific way that teaches you early that systems exist to serve themselves, and that the distance between official language and actual reality is a measurement worth taking carefully. She had worked as a bookkeeper in a factory that made machine parts. She had watched the factory change what it made as the war changed what it needed. She had kept the books accurately and said nothing about the changes because saying something about the changes served no practical purpose. Her husband Aldo had been a machinist at the same factory. He had been conscripted in 1942. The last letter arrived in the spring of 1944. After that, silence. The specific silence of a country that had lost the organizational capacity to deliver bad news individually and had moved on to delivering it collectively. Later, enlists. Teresa had joined the auxiliary because the alternative was worse. She had no ideology to protect. She had a practical understanding of how enclosed systems functioned and a clear-eyed assessment of where she stood inside this one. She did not hate the Americans. She did not fear them in the specific way Rosaria feared them. She simply did not know what they were yet, and she was the kind of person who needed to know what a thing was before she decided how to respond to it. She walked through the open gate and looked around the camp with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. Giovanna and Rosaria followed her through. A guard met them on the other side. He was young, perhaps 22, with the unhurried manner of someone who had performed this particular task before. He said something in English and looked at the group of 11 women climbing down from the truck. A second man stepped forward. He was perhaps 40, with the particular posture of someone accustomed to giving instructions. He spoke Italian, careful, slightly formal, with an accent that placed him somewhere between the classroom and the street. "My name is Corporal Rinaldi," he said. "I was born in New Jersey. My parents are from Campania. I will translate for you today, and until you are assigned a permanent interpreter. Do you understand?" Several women nodded. "You are at Camp Alva, Oklahoma. You are in the custody of the United States Army. You will be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. Your names will be recorded. You will be assigned quarters. You will be informed of the camp regulations this afternoon." He paused. He looked at the group with the expression of someone adding something that was not on the official list. "No one here is going to hurt you," he said. Rosaria, standing 2 women to Giovanna's left, made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. If you are enjoying this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me where in the US you are watching this video. Corporal Rinaldi looked at her. He did not respond to the sound. He simply looked at her for a moment with the patience of a man who had translated this particular announcement before and understood what it cost people to hear it. Then he turned and led them toward the processing building. The processing unfolded with the impersonal efficiency of a system that had been running long enough to find its rhythm. Names recorded. Documents examined. A medical examination, brief, professional, conducted by a young army doctor who apologized in English, through Rinaldi, before each physical assessment. "He says he is sorry if this is uncomfortable," Rinaldi translated. "He says it is required." Giovanna noted the apology. She filed it. Then Sergeant Helen Pruitt appeared. She was perhaps 40, with the particular quality of someone who had lived her entire life in a place and had become, over time, indistinguishable from it. The flat practical efficiency of the Oklahoma plains in her movements. The directness of a woman who had never needed to be anything other than direct. She wore her uniform with the ease of someone who had worn it long enough to forget it was a uniform. She spoke no Italian. Rinaldi translated. "You will follow me to Barracks 7. I will show you your quarters and explain the rules. The rules are not complicated. If you have questions, you ask through the interpreter. If you have a problem, you come to me." She turned and walked. The women followed. Barracks 7 was a long wooden building painted dark green with small windows on both sides. Inside, 20 metal beds lined the walls in 2 rows. Each bed had a mattress, a pillow, 2 folded wool blankets. A black iron stove sat at the center of the room. Electric lights hung from the ceiling, simple, functional, present. At the far end of the building, a door led to a washroom. Sergeant Pruitt pushed it open and gestured them through. Giovanna walked in. She looked at the sinks, the toilet stalls, the shower stalls with their curtains and their chrome handles catching the light from the single window above. She turned the hot water handle. Water came out. She turned the other handle. Steam rose from the stream as it hit the floor of the stall. She stood with her hand under the hot water and felt it against her palm and thought about the last time she had felt hot water from a tap. She could not immediately place the memory. It was somewhere before 1943, before the shortages, before the rationing, before the building on Via Solferino lost its boiler to the requisition orders, and the water in the pipes ran cold all winter, and nobody came to fix it because there was nothing left to fix it with. She turned off the tap. She walked back into the main room where Sergeant Pruitt was explaining the schedule through Rinaldi. Wake at 6. Breakfast at 6:30. Work assignments posted each morning, voluntary. Prisoners could not be compelled to work. Those who chose to work received 25 cents per day in camp currency, redeemable at the camp store. Rosaria, sitting on the edge of her assigned bunk, looked up at Rinaldi when he said this. Voluntary, she said. Voluntary, he confirmed. She looked back down. Her expression did not change. Also, Sergeant Pruitt said, and Rinaldi translated, mail is permitted. Letters home are read by censors before dispatch, but are permitted. If you need anything, come to me. She looked at the room. She looked at the women on their bunks, some sitting, some lying flat, some staring at the ceiling with the expression of people whose internal accounting systems had encountered a figure they did not know how to place. Then she left. The door closed behind her. The room was quiet. Outside, the Oklahoma afternoon pressed against the windows, the flat light of a country that had never been bombed, the enormous sky still visible above the fence line, the wheat field somewhere beyond that running all the way to a horizon with nothing broken on it. Giovanna sat on her bunk and looked at her hands. After a long time, Teresa spoke from across the room. She said it quietly, without drama, the way a bookkeeper states a figure that the ledger cannot dispute. They wrote our names down, she said. They gave us beds. They gave us hot water and 25 cents a day, and they said no one is going to hurt you. She paused. In Turin, before I left, I saw what they did to people they wanted to hurt. This is not that. Nobody answered her. Rosaria lay on her back and looked at the ceiling. Giovanna sat on her bunk and thought about the gate, standing open in the afternoon heat. Wide, unhurried. No calculation visible in it. No performance of openness. Simply a gate that was not closed because no one had decided it needed to be. She had been cataloging things her entire life. She had built order from accumulation. She did not yet have a category for this. Outside, the light was changing. The long Oklahoma dusk beginning. The sky going from blue to something deeper. The wheat fields holding the last of the gold. Somewhere across the camp a door opened, and the smell of something cooking crossed the yard and came through the gap at the bottom of the window. Real food. Hot, actual food. Giovanna lay back on her bunk and looked at the ceiling alongside Rosaria, and the two of them lay there in the gathering dark of their first American night and said nothing at all. The voluntary work list appeared on a board outside the administration building each morning at 7 o'clock. Giovanna found it on the third day. A single sheet of paper, handwritten in English with Italian translations beside each entry, pinned to the board with a tack. Kitchen detail. Laundry. Camp library. Organizing and cataloging. Administrative support. Agricultural work detail. Transport provided. She stood in front of it for a moment. The morning was already warm, the Oklahoma sun climbing fast over the flat eastern horizon, the red dirt of the yard beginning to hold the heat. She signed her name beside the library. Teresa, standing beside her, signed beside administrative support without hesitation. The practical instinct of a woman who understood that proximity to paperwork meant proximity to information. Rosaria read the list. She read it again. Then she walked back to the barracks without signing anything. The camp kitchen occupied a long building near the center of the compound. On the fourth morning, Giovanna passed its open side door on her way to the library, and the smell stopped her. Tomatoes. Cooked tomatoes. The specific sweetness of them reducing in a pan with oil and something herbed. A smell so precisely familiar that for a moment her feet simply did not move. She stood in the doorway. A man was working at the far stove, his back to her, moving between two burners with the economy of someone who had done this particular work long enough that his hands knew it without instruction. He was perhaps 30, broad-shouldered, wearing the army uniform with the sleeves rolled past the elbow. He turned and saw her. Buongiorno, he said. Casual. Unremarkable. The way you say good morning to someone standing in a doorway. Giovanna said nothing for a moment. You speak Italian, she said finally, in Italian. Some, he said, also in Italian. Enough. My mother is from Napoli. She made me learn so I wouldn't forget. He turned back to the stove and adjusted the flame under the pan. You want coffee? I have extra. She should have kept walking. The library opened at 7:30 and Corporal Rinaldi had explained that the catalog system needed reorganizing. The previous arrangement made no sense to anyone, including the man who had created it. She had work to do. She stepped inside. His name was Enzo Romano. He had grown up in Newark, New Jersey, the second of 4 children. His father sold hardware. His mother cooked every Sunday for anyone who appeared at the door, which was, by Enzo's accounting, a variable number that had never once been 0. He told her this while he poured coffee into a tin cup and set it on the edge of the counter closest to her. He told it without particular purpose, the way people talk while their hands are busy with something else. Your mother, Giovanna said. What did she cook? He thought about this with genuine attention, the way the question deserved. Everything. Ragu on Sundays. All day, you could smell it from the street. Pasta e fagioli in winter. Bacala at Christmas, which I hated as a child and now miss. He glanced at her. You're from Milan? Yes. My mother had a friend from Milan. She said Milanese cooking was too refined. He said it without judgment, simply reporting. She meant it as a criticism. It probably was one, Giovanna said. He laughed. A short, real laugh, not performed, not aimed at making her comfortable. Just a response to something that was actually slightly funny. She drank the coffee. It was strong and hot and real. She looked at the pan on the stove. What are you making? Sauce. The tomatoes they give me here are not San Marzano, but they are not terrible. He stirred the pan. I make what I can with what there is. That is cooking. That is also most other things, Giovanna said. He looked at her. Yes, he said. It is. She finished the coffee. She set the cup on the counter. She picked up the conversation's obvious exit and used it. I have to go. The library. Come back tomorrow, he said. I'll have the sauce finished. You can tell me if it's wrong. She walked to the library and spent the morning reorganizing a catalog system that had indeed been created by someone with no discernible system in mind. She worked carefully and did not think about the kitchen. She thought about the kitchen. Rosaria had found a place on the eastern side of the barracks where the building threw shade in the late morning. A narrow strip of cooler air against the wooden wall where she sat and watched the camp move through its daily rhythm without participating in it. Private Bobby Sutton found her there on the 5th day. He was 20 years old and from a town called Woodward, 40 miles northwest of Alva, where his family had farmed wheat for 2 generations. He had the particular quality of young men from flat open country, a patience in the body, an unhurriedness in the eyes, as though the landscape had taught him that things arrived in their own time and rushing them served no purpose. He was carrying 2 cups of water. He held one out toward her. Rosaria looked at the cup. She looked at him. He didn't say anything. He simply held the cup at a neutral distance, not pushing it toward her, not withdrawing it. Available. She took it. He sat down against the wall 2 feet from her, not close, and drank his own water and looked out at the yard. A group of male prisoners on the far side of the fence were playing some kind of card game in the shade of the water tower. 2 American guards were watching them with the relaxed attention of men monitoring something that required no intervention. After a while, Rosaria said, in Italian, "Where are you from?" He looked at her. He had not understood the words, but he had understood the question, the gesture of it, the shape. He pointed northwest. Woodward, he said. About, he held up 4 fingers, 40 miles. She looked northwest. Flatland. Wheat. The enormous sky. Wheat? She said in English, one of perhaps 12 words she had. He looked at her with what might have been mild surprise. Yeah, he said. Wheat. My dad. And his dad. He paused. You? She understood the question. Grano, she said. Then, finding the English somewhere from a schoolroom that felt very far away. Wheat. Also. She paused. Near Brescia. He nodded slowly. Italy, he said. Yes. They sat with that for a moment. 2 people from wheat farms on opposite sides of a war, sitting in the shade of a building in Oklahoma with cups of water. Is it? He started and stopped. He tried again, slowly, as though choosing words from a limited supply. Is your family okay? Rosaria looked at him. She understood the words. She understood the question beneath them, the genuine one, the one that cost something to ask. She thought about her sister's last letter. She thought about the things the letter had described carefully and the things it had not described because there were no words left for them. I don't know, she said in Italian. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the answer. He nodded once and looked back out at the yard and said nothing else. They finished their water in silence. When Rosaria stood to go back inside, she did not say anything. Neither did he. But she had noted the question, the way it was asked, the genuine weight behind it, the absence of any agenda in it. She had been waiting 5 days for the cruelty to begin. It had not begun. She filed this under the category Rosaria had labeled, privately, things that do not fit, a category that had been accumulating entries since the gate. Teresa had been working in the administration office for 3 days before she asked the question. She had spent those 3 days learning the filing system, which was logical and consistent and organized by a principle she recognized immediately. Every prisoner had a number. Every number had a file. Every file contained the same categories of information in the same order. Name, origin, unit, date of capture, health assessment, work assignment, correspondence record. The system assumed nothing and recorded everything. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Corporal Rinaldi was working at the adjacent desk, processing a stack of incoming correspondence. Teresa looked up from her filing. Can I ask you something? Yes, he said. The files, she said. Every prisoner. The correspondence record. It shows what letters were sent and received. The camp reads them before they go out. Correct, Rinaldi said. But they still go out. Yes. Why, she said. You have the letters. You could simply keep them. We would never know. Rinaldi set down his pen. He considered the question with the attention it deserved, not dismissing it, not deflecting it with official language. Geneva Convention, he said. Article 76. Prisoners are permitted to correspond with their families. That is the rule, Teresa said. I'm asking why you follow it. He looked at her for a moment. Because it's the rule, he said. In Italy, Teresa said carefully, rules existed until they became inconvenient. Then they were adjusted. I know, Rinaldi said. He said it without judgment. A plain acknowledgement of a plain fact. Here the rule is the rule. It doesn't adjust because the situation is inconvenient. That's the point of having it. Teresa looked at him. And if someone above you decided it was inconvenient, then I would follow the rule, and they would need to find a reason in writing to override it. And that reason would go in a file. He picked up his pen. Everything goes in a file. Teresa looked at the filing cabinet beside her desk. At the neat rows of folders, each one a name. Each name a record that existed independent of whether the person who created it wanted it to or not. That must make it difficult to do things quietly, she said. Yes, Rinaldi said. It does. He went back to his correspondence. Teresa went back to her filing. She worked steadily through the afternoon, moving folders from the incoming stack to their correct positions, each one slotting into its place with the small precise sound of a system that was exactly as large as it needed to be, and no larger. She thought about Aldo's factory in Turin. About the books she had kept there, accurate, complete, a record of everything the factory made and everything it changed and everything it became. About the fact that accuracy had never, in her experience, protected anything. She thought about the fact that here, in a prisoner of war camp in Oklahoma, accuracy appeared to be the protection. She was not certain what to do with that yet, but she was a bookkeeper. She knew how to sit with a figure that did not resolve immediately and wait for the ledger to show her where it belonged. That evening, after dinner, Giovanna found Rosaria sitting on her bunk with a letter she had started and stopped. 3 lines written, then a space, then nothing. What are you writing? Giovanna asked. I don't know, Rosaria said. She looked at the 3 lines. I started to tell my sister I was safe. Then I started to tell her about the food. Then I stopped. Why? Rosaria was quiet for a moment. Because I don't know how to say it without saying everything else. She folded the paper. And I don't know what everything else is yet. Giovanna sat on her own bunk across from her. Outside, the Oklahoma night was settling over the camp. The temperature dropping fast the way it dropped in open country. The sky going dark in a way that was different from the city dark she had grown up with. More complete. More present. A man in the kitchen spoke to me today, Giovanna said. He was American. From New Jersey. He learned Italian from his mother. Rosaria looked at her. He made tomato sauce, Giovanna said. It smelled like Via Solferino on a Sunday. Rosaria said nothing for a long moment. Did you eat it? She asked finally. No. I had to get to the library. But you wanted to. Giovanna looked at her hands. Yes, she said. I wanted to. Rosaria lay back on her bunk and looked at the ceiling. She picked up her unfinished letter and held it above her face and read the 3 lines she had written. Then she set it on the small shelf beside her bed. Tomorrow, she said, to the ceiling, to no one in particular, I'm going to sign the work list. Giovanna said nothing. Outside, the night settled completely over Alva, Oklahoma, and the wheat fields, and the open gate, and the enormous sky above all of it. Indifferent, enormous, and very far from everything the 3 women had ever called home. July arrived in Alva like a physical weight. The heat was not the heat Giovanna knew from Milan summers. That soft, damp warmth that gathered in courtyards and lifted in the evening when the air moved off the Po Valley. This was something different in kind. Dry, flat, absolute. It came from the sky and rose from the red earth simultaneously, as though the land and the sun had reached an agreement about temperature that excluded the people standing between them. By 7 in the morning, the air already pressed against the skin. By noon, the yard was empty of anyone who did not have a reason to be in it, and the reasons were few. The women moved through the heat the way you move through difficult terrain, conserving, adjusting, finding the shaded edges of things. The barracks held the warmth from the previous day and added the current days on top of it. At night, Giovanna lay on her bunk with the single sheet pushed to the foot of the bed and listened to the other women breathe in the dark and thought about the reading room at the Biblioteca Ambrosiana in Milan, which had been cool even in August. The particular coolness of thick stone walls and high ceilings and the accumulated cold of centuries. A coolness that had nothing to do with any machine and everything to do with what the building had been built to be. She thought about it with the specific longing of someone who understands that the thing being missed is not coming back in any form she would recognize. She turned over and went to sleep. The work list on Monday morning had 3 new entries. Giovanna was already at the board when Rosaria came across the yard. She was moving with the deliberate quality of someone who has made a decision and intends to execute it before the decision has time to reconsider itself. She picked up the pencil on the string beside the board and signed her name next to kitchen detail without reading the other options. Rosaria. The voice came from behind them both. Low, precise, carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. Lucia Trinity was 31 years old and had been an auxiliary sergeant major in the SAF unit attached to the Brescia garrison, a unit that had functioned until the last possible day, that had not surrendered until surrendering was the only remaining option, and that had done so, in Lucia's accounting, under protest. She was from Milan, as it happened, born 6 streets from where Giovanna had grown up, but the city had produced 2 entirely different women from the same coordinates, which was something Giovanna had been quietly thinking about since she first understood who Lucia was. Lucia had the quality of someone who had organized her understanding of the world into a structure so complete and internally consistent that new information arrived not as data, but as attempted intrusion. She was not unintelligent. That was the thing that made her difficult. A stupid true believer was easy to observe and set aside. Lucia's belief was constructed, built from real observations arranged into a framework that served the belief, which was a different thing entirely and harder to argue with. She looked at Rosaria's name on the work list. Then at Rosaria. Kitchen detail, she said. Yes, Rosaria said. With the American cook. With whoever is in the kitchen. Lucia looked at the list for a moment. Then she looked at Giovanna, who had been standing at the board throughout this exchange doing nothing in particular with the pencil she was still holding. You understand what the kitchen is, Lucia said. Not a question. It's where they make the food, Rosaria said. It's where they make the impression, Lucia said. Her voice had not risen. It remained at the same precise level. The voice of someone presenting evidence, not arguing. The food is generous. The cook speaks Italian. The guards are polite. The gate is open. She paused. Each of these things is a decision. Someone decided. And the decision was not made for your benefit. It was made for the benefit of what they want you to think about them. The yard was quiet except for the heat. Somewhere across the camp a door opened and closed. Rosaria said. And what do they want me to think? That they are different from what you were told, Lucia said. That the people who told you were wrong. That your country was wrong, and theirs is right. And the proof is a bowl of pasta and a man from New Jersey who learned his mother's language. She looked at Rosaria steadily. Once you believe that, once you need to believe that to make sense of where you are, you will tell yourself anything they need you to tell yourself. And they know it. That is the point of the kitchen. The 3 of them stood in the heat. A bead of sweat ran down the back of Giovanna's neck. Rosaria looked at the work list. She looked at her name written there in her own handwriting. Then she looked at Lucia. Maybe, she said. Or maybe the soup is just soup. She walked toward the kitchen building. Lucia watched her go. Then she looked at Giovanna. Giovanna said nothing. She put the pencil down on the ledge below the board. She walked toward the library. She thought about Lucia's argument for the rest of the morning, working through the catalog with half her attention and turning the argument over with the other half. The frustrating thing, the thing she could not put cleanly in the category of simply wrong, was that Lucia was not entirely incorrect. Of course the Americans understood the effect of their system. Of course the open gate and the voluntary work and the 25 cents a day produced a psychological result that served their interests. You could not build a system that consistently generated those results and be unaware of them. The question, the one Lucia's argument could not answer and did not try to, was whether a thing could be both calculated and genuine simultaneously. Giovanna shelved books and thought about this, and came to no conclusion. She found the Dante in the afternoon. She had been working through the Italian language section, a modest collection, perhaps 40 volumes, when her hand stopped on the spine. La Divina Commedia. She pulled it from the shelf. The cover was worn at the corners, the spine cracked from use. She opened it to the front page. Stamped in blue ink, slightly uneven, as though the stamp had been applied by someone who did not do it often. Donated by the Esposito family, Alva, Oklahoma. Giovanna stood at the shelf with the book open in her hands. She read the stamp again. An Italian family, in Alva, Oklahoma, who owned a copy of Dante and had given it to a prisoner of war camp library in the middle of the American plains. She stood there for a long time. Around her the library was quiet and warm, the heat pressing gently through the single window above the shelves, the smell of old paper and wood, and the faint iron smell of the stove and used in summer. She did not tell anyone about the stamp that day. She carried it back to the shelf she had been working on and continued cataloging. But she placed the Dante at the end of the Italian section where it would be easy to find, and she noted the name in the back of her mind with the precise attention she gave to things that did not yet have a category but were clearly going to need one. The friction came on a Wednesday. A guard named Corporal Hess, not Sutton, not anyone whose face had become familiar, was managing the afternoon movement between the barracks and the mess hall. He was perhaps 28, with the look of a man doing a long rotation in July heat who had used up whatever patience he had started the week with sometime around Tuesday. When the line of women slowed at the mess hall door because two of them were trying to resolve a question about seating through a combination of Italian and gesture, Hess said something in English, sharply, and pointed at the door. Nobody understood the words. The sharpness needed no translation. The women moved through the door in silence. One of them, a woman named Carla, from Florence, who had been at the camp for 3 weeks and had said almost nothing to anyone, went to her seat with the expression of someone returning to a conclusion they had temporarily set aside. At the table, Lucia said nothing. She did not need to. The moment had said it for her. Teresa, sitting at the end of the bench, watched Lucia not saying anything and understood exactly what was happening. Lucia was filing the moment, adding it to a ledger she maintained for precisely this purpose. One impatient guard in a July heat wave was becoming, in Lucia's accounting, confirmation of a truth that the polite guards and the open gate and the hot water had been temporarily obscuring. Teresa ate her dinner and said nothing. Later, walking back to the barracks in the thick evening air, she fell into step beside Giovanna. Hess, Teresa said. Yes, Giovanna said. Lucia will use it. She already has. He was hot and tired and short with people, Teresa said. My husband's foreman was short with people every day for 11 years. It didn't make him a fascist. It made him someone who needed a different job. I know that, Giovanna said. Rosaria doesn't know it yet, Teresa said. She's still deciding which things count. They walked in silence for a moment. The heat had not broken with the sun going down. It simply changed quality, from aggressive to persistent. What did you decide? Giovanna asked. When did you stop deciding which things counted? Teresa thought about this honestly. In the administration office, she said. Third day, when Rinaldi told me everything goes in a file. That convinced you? It made me understand something, Teresa said. Where I came from, power didn't need files because it didn't need to justify itself. Here the files are the justification. The system has to show its work. She paused. That's not theater. Theater doesn't require paperwork. Giovanna thought about this. Lucia would say the paperwork is the most sophisticated part of the theater, she said. Lucia would, Teresa agreed. And I can't prove she's entirely wrong. She stopped at the barracks door and looked at the sky, the stars coming out now over the Oklahoma dark, more stars than either of them had ever seen over a city, the Milky Way a faint smear across the black. But I've been keeping books my whole life. I know what accurate records look like. And I know what it means when someone bothers to keep them. She went inside. Giovanna stayed outside for a moment. She looked at the sky. She looked at the gate at the far end of the compound, still open, even at night. The wooden crossbar with Camp ELVA visible in the lamplight. The road beyond it running straight into the Oklahoma dark. She thought about Lucia's argument. About the kitchen and the open gate and the calculated effect of consistent decency. She thought about Teresa's files. She thought about the Dante on the library shelf with the Esposito name stamped inside. She thought about something Enzo had said that morning when she stopped at the kitchen door on her way to the library. She had been stopping most mornings now, a habit that had formed without her deciding to form it. He had been making bread, the dough worked through on the flour-dusted counter, and he had said without looking up, "My mother used to say that the way you feed someone tells them what you think they are." She had thought he was making a point about the camp, a small political argument in domestic language. But he had continued, still working the dough. She fed everyone the same. The landlord, the delivery boy, the neighbor she didn't like. Same table, same portions. She said you didn't have to feel the same about everyone to treat them the same. He had looked up then. She was usually right about things. Giovanna had gone to the library and thought about it all morning. She thought about it now, standing in the Oklahoma night with the stars overhead and the open gate at the end of the road, and Lucia, Trinity somewhere inside the barracks building a case from one impatient guard in July heat. She went inside. She took out her diary, small, cloth-covered, the same one she had carried since Milan, and wrote 3 sentences. The gate is still open. I don't know yet if that means what I think it means. But I notice that I am no longer certain it means nothing. She closed the diary and lay back on her bunk and listened to the Oklahoma night press its enormous silence against the walls of the barracks. Across the room Rosaria was already asleep. On her small shelf beside her bunk, her unfinished letter home had acquired 3 more lines since the night before. Giovanna could not read them from this distance. She did not try. She looked at the ceiling and thought about files and kitchens and a book of Dante donated by a family in Oklahoma who had kept enough of where they came from to give it away. Outside the heat persisted, patient and enormous, indifferent to everyone beneath it. The meeting was held on Saturday night in the narrow space between the east wall of Barracks 9 and the fence. Lucia had chosen the location carefully, far enough from the guard rotation path that the conversation would not be interrupted, close enough to the perimeter that anyone watching from the towers would see only women taking evening air in the heat. 5 women. Lucia standing, the others sitting on upturned crates someone had moved there over the preceding days, one at a time, without drawing attention. Rosaria had not planned to come. She had been on her way back from the kitchen, the evening cleanup, flowers still faint on her forearms, the smell of the day's cooking in her hair, when Carla from Florence appeared beside her and said only, "Lucia, tonight." After lights down, Rosaria had said nothing. She had gone to the barracks, washed her arms at the sink, lain on her bunk for an hour listening to the heat settle into the building's wood. Then she had gotten up and gone. She told herself she was going because she wanted to hear what Lucia had to say. This was true. It was not the whole truth, but it was true enough to move her feet in that direction. Lucia looked at her when she arrived, but said nothing about her presence. She simply continued. She was speaking quietly, without the hard edge that sometimes entered her voice in the open yard. This was a different register, the voice of someone making a careful argument to people she needed to convince rather than people she needed to command. 3 months, she said. We have been here 3 months. And I want to ask each of you something honestly. She looked around the small group. What has changed? Not here, at home. Your families. Your cities. The country we came from. What has the American kindness done for any of that? Nobody answered. Your sister in Brescia, Lucia said, looking at Rosaria. Not cruelty in it, precision. Is she eating better because you are eating well here? Rosaria said nothing. The rubble in Milan, Lucia said, and now she was looking at no one in particular, at the space between them, at the argument itself. The rubble in Turin and Verona, and every city that the war touched, it is still rubble. The soup here is good. The Americans are polite. The gate is open. She paused. None of that moves a single stone in a single ruined street. The evening air pressed warm and still against them. Somewhere across the camp a radio was playing faintly, an American song, something with a brass section, drifting from the direction of the guards' quarters. They are kind to you because kindness is the most efficient tool they have, Lucia continued. It costs them almost nothing. It produces compliance, cooperation, the appearance of consent. And when you go home, if you go home, you will carry that kindness like a debt. You will speak well of them. You will remember the food and the open gate. You will not remember what they were part of. What were they part of? Rosaria asked. Lucia looked at her. A war, she said. That destroyed everything we had. We were part of that war, Rosaria said. We were inside it. Yes, Lucia said. And we lost. And now we are here eating their food and signing their work lists, and tomorrow some of you are going to sit at the table of an Italian family that chose America over Italy 3 generations ago, and eat pasta in Oklahoma, and feel something that resembles belonging. She said the last word with a precision that made it clear she understood its weight. And when you feel it, I want you to remember that your father is still hungry in Brescia, and ask yourself what that feeling is worth. The radio across the camp finished its song. Another began. Rosaria sat on her crate, and looked at the red Oklahoma earth between her feet. She thought about her father, about his coat sold for flour, about potato peels and the specific language of her sister's letters, the careful words chosen by someone who knew the letter would be read and was trying to say what could not be said inside the words that were allowed. She did not have an answer for Lucia. She went back to the barracks and lay in the dark for a long time, and the thing Lucia had said sat in her chest with the patient weight of something that had been placed there carefully and was not planning to move on its own. Sunday morning arrived white and still. The heat was present from the first light, the sky already bleached at the horizon, the red earth radiating yesterday's warmth back upward before the new days had fully arrived. Giovanna woke early and lay watching the light change in the barracks window and thought about the Esposito name stamped in the Dante and what it meant that she was thinking about it. At breakfast, Rosaria ate in silence. Teresa ate with the focused efficiency of someone fueling a body for a day's work. Neither of them spoke about the night before. Giovanna had not been at the meeting, but she had seen Rosaria return, and she had seen the particular quality of stillness that had settled over her. Not peace, not its opposite, but the specific stillness of someone carrying a question they cannot yet put down. At 9 o'clock, Corporal Rinaldi appeared at the barracks door. The Sunday group. The chaplain is waiting at the main gate. 7 women. Giovanna, Rosaria, Teresa, and 4 others. They walked across the yard in the building heat, through the open gate. Giovanna noticed it again, as she noticed it every time, the particular quality of a threshold that required no permission, and into the dirt road beyond. Father Matteo was a small man from Brooklyn whose parents had come from Calabria and who spoke Italian with the specific accent of someone who had learned the language in a kitchen rather than a classroom. He had been the camp chaplain for 8 months. He shook each woman's hand as they assembled and said good morning to each one individually, using names he had clearly taken the trouble to learn. The truck to St. Mary's took 10 minutes. The church was white clapboard with a small bell tower, sitting at the edge of Alva's main street between a hardware store and a barber shop. It was not a grand building. It was the building a small Oklahoma town builds when it decides it needs a church, practical, honest, without pretension. Inside it was cool. The thick walls and the high ceiling held the night's temperature against the morning's assault, and the coolness landed on the women's skin as they entered like something they had forgotten was possible. Giovanna stopped just inside the door and simply stood in it for a moment. An usher, a man of perhaps 60 in a brown Sunday suit, his face the specific weathered brown of someone who had worked outside for decades, led them to pews in the middle of the congregation. Not the back, not a separate section. The middle, among the families already seated, as though the question of where enemy prisoners should sit had been considered and answered with the same plainness that answered most questions in a small Oklahoma town. The Mass began. Latin. The same Latin Giovanna had heard in the Duomo in Milan, in the small church near her mother's apartment, in the chapel at the school where she had done her first communion at 7 years old. The same words in the same order, spoken by a priest in a white clapboard church in Oklahoma with the same weight they carried everywhere they were spoken. Around her, American voices said the same words. Beside her, Rosaria went still in a way that was different from her recent stillness. Not the stillness of weight being carried, but the stillness of something being briefly set down. Her lips moved. The words she said were the words everyone was saying. She had known them since she was 4 years old in a village near Brescia, and they were the same words, and the people around her were saying them. And for the length of the Mass, the Latin held everyone in the same place regardless of everything that stood between them outside it. Giovanna watched Rosaria's face from the corner of her eye. She watched something complicated happen there, and then watched it become, for a few minutes, less complicated. She looked back at the altar and said nothing and let the Latin do what Latin does in old stone. Except there was no stone here. Only clapboard and Oklahoma heat outside the walls and the cool interior holding them against it. After the Mass, the congregation moved to the church hall. Long tables, white paper cloths, the smell of coffee and something baked, and the particular smell of a room full of people who have known each other for years and are comfortable in the knowledge. Families settled into their accustomed places. Children ran between the tables until someone's mother said a word, and they stopped. The women from the camp stood near the door, and Corporal Rinaldi translated Father Matteo's quiet instruction, "Find a seat anywhere. You are guests." An old man appeared at Giovanna's elbow. He was perhaps 75, small, with white hair and the very dark eyes of someone from the south of Italy. He was wearing a suit that had been good once, and had been maintained carefully through whatever years had passed since. He looked at Giovanna and then at the group and then back at Giovanna, and he said, in Italian that came from somewhere older than any classroom, "You are from the camp." "Yes," Giovanna said. "From Italy." "Yes." "Milan." He nodded slowly. "My grandfather was from Calabria," he said. "He came in 1899. He never went back." He looked at her with the dark eyes. "Welcome," he said. "Not welcome to America. Not welcome to Alva. Just the word, plain, as though she had arrived somewhere she had a right to be." "Thank you," Giovanna said. "Come," he said. "My wife has been cooking since Thursday." The Esposito table was in the corner of the hall, long enough for 12 people, already half full with family, children, a daughter-in-law, 2 men who looked like sons, a teenage girl who looked at the Italian women with the open curiosity of someone who had heard about them and was now making her own assessment. The food arrived in stages, carried from the kitchen by Mrs. Esposito herself, a small, broad woman of perhaps 70, her white hair pinned back, her movements efficient with the efficiency of someone who had been feeding large numbers of people for 50 years and had developed an economy of motion equal to the task. Pasta first. Handmade. Not the refined northern kind Giovanna knew, but something rougher and more generous. The sauce thick and dark with long cooking. The smell of it rising from the bowls as they were set down, filling the corner of the room with something that had no business being in Oklahoma in 1945 and was entirely, absolutely there. Giovanna picked up her fork. She ate one bite and sat with it. She thought about Enzo in the kitchen saying the way you feed someone tells them what you think they are. She thought about his mother in Newark who fed everyone the same. She looked at the Esposito table, at the old man in his maintained suit, at Mrs. Esposito moving between the kitchen and the hall, at the teenage girl who had stopped assessing the Italian women and was now simply sitting among them as though the assessment had concluded satisfactorily, and she thought about Lucia's question. What is the strategic value of the Esposito family? She could not find one. They were not army. They were not performing anything for anyone's benefit. They were a family in Oklahoma that had kept enough of where they came from to cook pasta on a Sunday, and they had set a table, and they had said welcome with the plain weight of people who meant it. She ate her pasta and felt something settle in her that had been unsettled for a long time. Rosaria had the letter in her pocket. She had carried it there since the previous morning, folded small, the paper worn soft at the creases from handling. She had not planned to bring it. She had not planned not to bring it. It had simply been in her pocket when she left the barracks, and she had not taken it out. She sat at the Esposito table with her bowl of pasta untouched in front of her, and she took the letter out and unfolded it on the table beside the bowl, and read it. She had read it many times. The words had not changed. Her sister's handwriting, careful and small to fit everything into the permitted space. The potato peels. The coat sold for flour. The youngest brother who had stopped growing, her sister wrote, which the doctor said was from not eating enough, which the doctor said with the careful language of someone describing a thing that could not be fixed with the resources available. Rosaria read the letter and looked at the pasta and looked at the letter. Mrs. Esposito appeared at her shoulder. She looked at Rosaria's face, then at the untouched bowl, then at the letter on the table, not reading it, simply registering that it was there and that it had produced this particular stillness in this particular young woman. She sat down in the empty chair beside Rosaria. She did not say anything for a moment. She looked at the table, at the food, at the hall full of people eating and talking. Then she looked at Rosaria, and she took her hand, both hands, the way an older woman takes the hands of someone younger when words are not the right instrument, and she said, in Italian that came from the same old place as her husband's, "Mangia, cara, eat. You are safe here." Rosaria looked at her. The words landed in a place she had not known was waiting for them. Not because they were new. Corporal Whitfield had said them from a phrase card the day they were captured, the day it had seemed like the beginning of something terrible. But because this woman had no phrase card. She had no military purpose, no strategic interest, no system she was maintaining. She was 70 years old, and she had been in Oklahoma her entire life. And she had cooked pasta since Thursday, and she was holding Rosaria's hands, and saying you are safe here, because it was true, and because she wanted Rosaria to know it was true, and because that was the only reason she needed. Rosaria looked at the letter on the table, at her sister's careful handwriting, at the words describing a brother who had stopped growing. She thought about Lucia, about the argument that was almost right, about the kindness that costs nothing and produces compliance. She thought about Mrs. Esposito's hands. She thought, this costs her nothing either, and it is still real. Those two things can both be true. Something unlocked. Not loudly, not with the drama of a thing breaking, with the quiet of a door that has been stuck for a long time and has finally found the right temperature to open. She picked up her fork. She ate. The tears came without announcement, running down her face into the pasta, and she did not stop them, and she did not stop eating. Mrs. Esposito kept holding one of her hands, and with the other Rosaria ate, and the food was good and the hall was full of the sound of people who had nowhere else to be and no reason to be anywhere else. And outside the Oklahoma sun pressed down on Alva with its flat indifferent heat, and inside the church hall the pasta was warm and the coffee was real, and an old woman from Calabria, by way of Oklahoma, by way of 1899, by way of everything that had happened in between, held a young woman's hand and waited without impatience for her to finish crying. Teresa, sitting 3 seats away, watched all of this. She watched it with the attention of a bookkeeper reviewing a final figure, not surprised by it, having known for some time what the ledger was building toward, but present for the moment the column closed. She ate her pasta and said nothing and let the moment be what it was. On the truck back to camp, nobody spoke for a long time. The Oklahoma afternoon moved past the canvas sides, the wheat fields, the red earth, the enormous sky beginning its long descent toward evening. The heat was still present, but different now, the angle of the sun changing its quality from assault to something almost gentle. Giovanna had the Esposito address written on a folded piece of paper in her pocket. The old man had pressed it into her hand at the door of the hall as they left, without ceremony, the way you give someone something they will need later. She held it in her pocket without taking it out. Rosaria sat across from her, her eyes dry now, looking out through the canvas gap at the passing fields with an expression Giovanna had not seen on her face before. Not peace, something more complicated than peace. The expression of someone who has set down a weight they have been carrying for so long that the absence of it is itself disorienting. Who is still feeling the shape of what they were holding even though their hands are empty. After a while Rosaria said, quietly, to the passing wheat fields, She just held my hand. Giovanna said nothing. She didn't need a reason, Rosaria said. She didn't need me to be anything. She just held my hand. The truck rolled on through the Oklahoma afternoon. I know, Giovanna said. That night, for the first time since the camp had absorbed them into its rhythm, Rosaria finished a letter home. She wrote it in the small light above her bunk, 3 pages in her careful handwriting, the permitted words chosen not to deceive the censor, but because they were the words she actually had. The last paragraph said, "Dear Anna, I cannot explain everything I have seen here in a letter. I will tell you when I come home. But I want you to know that I have met people here, American people, Italian-American people, who held my hand when I was crying and fed me pasta and asked nothing in return. I do not know yet what to do with that. But I know it is true, and I think truth is the only thing worth carrying home." She folded the letter and placed it in the envelope and wrote her sister's address on the front. She put it on the small shelf beside her bunk. She lay back and looked at the ceiling. Across the room, from Lucia's bunk, there was silence, the specific silence of someone awake in the dark, present and still, maintaining something that was becoming heavier every day to hold. Rosaria closed her eyes. Outside, the Oklahoma night settled over Alva, over the wheat fields, over the open gate and the enormous sky and the red earth that held the day's heat long after the day was gone. August became September without announcement. The heat did not break so much as gradually relent, a degree at a time. The mornings arriving cooler by increments so small that you only noticed them accumulated over weeks. The wheat fields outside the camp perimeter had gone from gold to pale to the dry brown of harvest, and on certain mornings the smell of cut grain came through the barracks window with the dawn, a smell that was the same smell as home, and entirely not home simultaneously. Giovanna noticed this without recording it. She had been noticing things for 4 months, and her diary had accumulated, page by careful page, a record of observations that she sometimes read back to herself in the evenings, not for comfort, but to track the distance between the woman who had stepped off the truck in June and the woman sitting on the bunk in September with the diary in her hands. The distance was not as large as it should have been, perhaps, or it was larger than she could measure. She was not certain which. What she was certain of, she was not the same woman. And the difference was not in what she had been told, or argued, or convinced of. It was in what she had seen. The open gate. The hot water. The Dante stamp. Mrs. Esposito's table. The sum of small things that no single ideology could fully account for. She closed the diary, and went to the kitchen. Enzo was making bread. He did this every Thursday. A task that had no military necessity, and that he had, by some negotiation she had never witnessed, simply continued doing because the camp had flour, and the bread that resulted was better than what the supply chain provided, and nobody had found a reason to stop him. She had been coming to the kitchen most mornings for 2 months now. The habit had long since stopped requiring justification. She came, he made coffee, they talked, in Italian, in the mixture of Italian and English that had developed between them over the weeks, in the occasional comfortable silence of 2 people who had established that silence was permitted. She sat at the counter with her coffee, and watched his hands work the dough. "We leave in 3 weeks, she said. "I know," he said. He did not stop working. "Rinaldi told me the repatriation schedule." "October," she said. "October," he confirmed. She drank her coffee. Outside the kitchen window, the September morning was doing its slow work of becoming a day, the light changing on the red earth, the long flat shadows of the fence posts shortening as the sun climbed. "My mother's ragu," Giovanna said. "She made it every Sunday. All day. You could smell it from the street." Enzo looked up from the dough. "You told me once your mother said the same thing," she said. "I did," he said. "I used to think that was a coincidence," she said. "Now I think it was just Sunday. And mother's. And the smell of something cooking all day." He worked the dough in silence for a moment. "When you get back," he said, "find a Sunday. Make the ragu. Milan is in ruins. The stoves still work," he said. "My mother wrote me about Naples after the liberation. Half the city was rubble. She made ragu." He looked at her. She said the smell reminded the street that it was still a street. Giovanna sat with that. "Write to us," Enzo said. He had gone back to the bread. "When you get home, my mother would want to know you arrived safely. She has an interest in the women from the camp. Since I wrote to her about the kitchen." "Your mother knows about the kitchen?" "My mother knows about everything," he said. "I write to her every week." She wrote back and said, "Send them my recipe for the sauce. The real one. With the basil at the end, not the beginning." He glanced at her. "I was going to give it to you before you left." Giovanna looked at him. She thought about a woman in Newark she had never met, who had sent her ragu recipe to Oklahoma for Italian prisoners she would never meet, because her son had written to her about a kitchen and she had decided, from 4 states away, that this was what the situation required. "Tell her thank you," Giovanna said. "Tell her yourself." Enzo said. Write to her. She will write back. She always writes back. He gave her the address on a piece of kitchen paper, written in his round handwriting, flour dusted at the corner from his thumb. She folded it and put it in her pocket alongside the Esposito address that had been living there since July. She finished her coffee. She went to the library for the last time. The Dante was gone from the shelf. She had known it would be. She had put it on Lucia's bunk 10 days earlier and had not looked for it since, had deliberately not looked for it, giving the gesture the same privacy she would give anything placed without expectation of return. She ran her finger along the shelf where it had been. The gap between the two adjacent books was the exact width of the spine. She did not fill it. She left the gap. She spent the morning doing what she had done every morning for 4 months, organizing, cataloging, building order from accumulation. She worked through the remaining Italian language section, checking each volume against her handwritten catalog, correcting 2 entries she had made incorrectly in July when the heat had been at its worst and her attention had been divided. At noon she closed the catalog and set the pencil down on the cover. She looked at the shelves she had organized, at the neat rows, each book in its place, each spine legible, each title findable by anyone who came looking. 3,000 books in a room in Oklahoma that would go on being a room in Oklahoma after she was gone, with or without her catalog. She thought about the Biblioteca Ambrosiana in Milan, about the reading room with the thick stone walls and the accumulated cold of centuries, about whether the building was standing. She did not know if it was standing. She picked up her pencil and wrote one final entry in the catalog, not a book title, not a call number, but a note at the bottom of the last page in her careful handwriting. Catalog reorganized June, September 1945 by Giovanna Bianchi, Milan. The Italian language section is on the 3rd shelf from the left, alphabetical by author. She closed the catalog and left it on the desk and walked out of the library into the September morning. The confrontation that never happened occurred on a Tuesday. Rosaria was crossing the yard toward the kitchen when Lucia fell into step beside her, not blocking her path, not positioning herself as an obstacle, simply walking in the same direction at the same pace. The yard was busy with the morning's movement, women going to work assignments, guards doing the rotation change, a supply truck idling near the warehouse. They walked in silence for 20 feet. Then Lucia said, "You stopped coming." "Yes," Rosaria said. "You could have said something." "I didn't have anything to say," Rosaria said. "I still don't." They walked another 10 feet. "When we get home," Lucia said, "it will be as I told you. The ruins will still be ruins. The hunger will still be hunger. The kindness here will not have changed any of it." "No," Rosaria said. "It won't." "Then what was the point of it?" Rosaria stopped walking. Lucia stopped beside her. They stood in the middle of the yard with the morning moving around them. "Mrs. Esposito held my hand," Rosaria said, "while I cried. While I read my sister's letter about my brother not growing because there wasn't enough food." She looked at Lucia. She held my hand. She didn't fix anything. She didn't pretend to fix anything. She just held my hand. Lucia said nothing. "I'm not going home thinking America is paradise," Rosaria said. "I'm going home knowing that a woman in Oklahoma held my hand when I was crying and asked nothing back. That's true. It happened. And I'm going to carry it." She turned and walked toward the kitchen. Lucia stood in the middle of the yard for a moment. Around her the camp continued its morning rhythm, the supply truck idling, the guards rotating, the Oklahoma sun climbing its flat arc toward noon. Then she walked back to the barracks. The Dante was on her shelf. She had put it there 10 days ago and had not moved it. She told herself she had not moved it because there was nowhere else to put it and the shelf had space. This explanation was accurate and not complete. She sat on her bunk and picked it up. She opened it to the front page. The Esposito stamp. Blue ink, slightly uneven. The name and address of a family in Alva, Oklahoma, who had kept this book for 40 years and given it away. She read the stamp for what was perhaps the 15th time. She had an explanation for it. The explanation was sound. Sentiment, cultural nostalgia, the immigrant's habit of preserving markers of origin as a way of maintaining identity in a foreign context. None of it required goodness. None of it required the conclusion that Giovanna wanted her to draw. She closed the book. She put it back on the shelf. She lay back on her bunk and looked at the ceiling of Barracks 7 for the last time. They were moving to the repatriation barracks tomorrow, a different building, closer to the processing center. And she thought about the Esposito family. About 3 generations in Oklahoma. About a grandfather from Calabria who came in 1899 and never went back. She thought about what it meant to choose a place. To decide that a place was yours not because you were born to it, but because you had built something in it. To keep a book of Dante on your shelf in Oklahoma for 40 years and donate it to a prison camp library, because it was the right thing to do with a book. She did not have a category for this. She was a woman who had organized her understanding of the world into a structure so complete that new information arrived as intrusion. She knew this about herself. She had known it for some time. The structure was still standing, but the Dante was on her shelf, and she had not returned it. The repatriation orders came on a Wednesday morning in late September. Rinaldi posted them on the board outside the administration building. October 14th. Trucks to the rail station at Enid. Train to New York. Ship across the Atlantic. Genoa. Home, or what remained of it. 3 weeks. The camp changed quality in those 3 weeks the way a room changes quality when you know you are leaving it. The same objects, the same routines, the same Oklahoma sky above the same red earth, but seen now through the specific lens of ending, which made everything simultaneously more vivid and more distant. Giovanna finished her final cataloging. The gray water, enormous and intact. The harbor busy with the ordinary commerce of a city that had never stopped being a city. Rosaria pressed her face to the train window and looked at it. Madonna, she said quietly. Not an exclamation. A plain response to a plain fact. The piers. The noise. The smell of the harbor, salt and fuel, and something industrial, and underneath it the specific smell of a city at full function, the smell of things being made and moved and used. Everywhere the evidence of a place that had not stopped. Cranes working. Ships loading. Traffic on the elevated roads above the waterfront. Men in ordinary clothes doing ordinary things with the unhurried efficiency of people for whom ordinary was still available. They were held in a processing facility near the pier for 2 days while the ship was prepared. A different facility from anything they had seen. Urban, temporary, the organized transit of a large movement of people. But the same system underneath. Files. Numbers. Names recorded. The rule visible in the procedure. On the second afternoon, Giovanna walked to the single window of the holding room and looked out at the New York harbor. A city that had not been bombed. Buildings standing from the waterline to wherever the fog took them. The Statue of Liberty visible in the harbor. She had not expected to see it, had not thought about it, and its appearance was therefore a surprise that arrived without the protection of anticipation. She looked at it for a long time. She did not think about what it meant. She simply looked at it. A woman in a harbor, her back to a continent, her face toward whatever was coming. The same harbor through which the Esposito grandfather had arrived in 1899, through which Enzo's parents had arrived from Naples, whenever that was, through which an uncountable number of people had arrived carrying whatever they carried and looking at this same harbor and deciding, or discovering, that this was where they were. She stood at the window until the light changed and the statue disappeared into the evening fog. The ship left on the morning of October 19th. As it moved out of the harbor, past the statue, past the mouth of the bay, past the point where the city became a skyline, and the skyline became a suggestion, and the suggestion became the horizon. Giovanna stood on the deck in the cold October air and watched America disappear. She put her hand in her coat pocket. The Esposito address. Enzo's mother's address. The folded recipe on kitchen paper, flour dusted at the corner. Her diary in the inside pocket, the Dante stamp copied on the last used page. She did not take any of it out. She just felt it there. The specific weight of small things that were more than they appeared to be, carried in a coat pocket across the Atlantic toward ruins she had not seen in 2 years and did not yet know how to imagine. Behind her, Rosaria stood at the rail and watched the American coastline until there was no coastline left to watch. Then she turned and looked at the open ocean ahead, gray, enormous, indifferent, with the expression of someone who has set down one thing and not yet picked up the next, standing in the space between them. Teresa was already below deck. She had said her goodbye to America from the pier, privately, in the specific way of a woman who does not require an audience for the things that matter. The ship moved east. Lucia stood at the stern. She stood there until the last suggestion of land was gone and the Atlantic was complete in every direction. She stood with her hands on the rail and her bag at her feet, the Dante at the bottom of the bag, the blue Esposito stamp facing down toward the dark water below. She stood there for a long time after there was nothing left to see. Then she picked up her bag and went below. Giovanna wrote the final entry in her diary that evening, in the small light above her bunk, as the ship moved east through the October Atlantic. She wrote, "They told us America would destroy us. What it destroyed instead was the distance between what we were told and what we found. I do not know yet who I will be when I step off this ship, but I know what I am carrying." The address of a finished her final cataloging. Rosaria worked every remaining day in the kitchen, learning from Enzo the specific timing of the sauce, the basil at the end, not the beginning, until she could do it from memory. Teresa completed the last of the filing she had been assigned and spent the final week teaching her replacement. a woman from Rome who had arrived in August, the system she had developed for the correspondence records. Lucia packed her things on the first day the repatriation orders were posted and did not unpack them. She lived out of her bag for 3 weeks in a prepared departure that had the quality of someone maintaining readiness for a movement order. The Dante was at the bottom of the bag. On the last evening, Enzo came to the women's section entrance with a paper bag. The guard at the door looked at the bag, looked at Enzo, looked at the bag again, and decided this was not a situation the regulations had specifically anticipated. He let him through. Enzo set the bag on the table in the common room. Inside, a jar of tomato sauce, sealed with wax. A folded piece of paper with the recipe, his mother's, from Naples, the basil at the end. A second piece of paper with his mother's address in Newark. The sauce will last 2 weeks if the seal holds, he said. Long enough to get to Italy. Maybe. He looked at the 3 women. At Giovanna, who had appeared at his kitchen door one morning and never fully left. At Rosaria, who had arrived angry and capable and had learned to make the sauce better than he had taught it. At Teresa, who had said almost nothing to him directly in 4 months and had understood everything. My mother says, he started. You wrote to her about us, Rosaria said. I write to her about everything, he said. She says, tell them they are welcome at the table. If they ever come back. Rosaria looked at the jar of sauce. She has never met us. No, Enzo said. But I described you. She said, they sound like people worth feeding. He paused. That is, for my mother, the highest possible assessment. Rosaria picked up the jar. She held it in both hands the way she had held the orange in the Esposito Church Hall, with the careful attention of someone receiving something that is more than it appears to be. Tell her thank you, she said. Write to her yourself, he said. She will write back. October 14th arrived cold and clear. The Oklahoma autumn had finally overcome the summer. The air sharp in the early morning. The sky a deeper blue than it had been all summer. The red earth holding the cold now instead of the heat. The wheat fields were harvested and bare, running to the horizon in pale brown rows. The trucks came at 7. The women carried their bags across the yard for the last time. Through the open gate, Giovanna looked at it as she passed through, as she had every time, noting the wooden crossbar, the unhurried openness of it, the road beyond running straight into the Oklahoma morning. She stopped on the other side of the gate. She turned and looked back at the camp, at the barracks in their neat rows, at the water tower, at the library building with its single window, at the flag above the administration building, moving slightly in the cold morning air, not snapping, just present, belonging to itself and to everyone beneath it simultaneously. She stood there for a moment. Then she got in the truck. The train from Enid to New York took 2 days. America passed the windows in its enormous, unhurried way, the plains giving way to hills, the hills to the industrial east, the scale of it remaining consistent in its inconsistency. Full. Intact. A country that had sent its people to the other side of the world to fight a war and had kept its own streets whole while doing it. Teresa sat beside Giovanna for the first 12 hours and said very little. Then, somewhere in Missouri, she said, I kept all those letters in the administration files. Giovanna looked at her. Not officially, Teresa said. The last 3 letters he sent before the silence. I made copies when I was processing the correspondence records. I put them in a file with my name on it. She paused. The system required documentation. I documented what I needed to keep. Teresa. He was a machinist, Teresa said. He fixed things. He believed that if something was broken you found the broken part, and you fixed it. She looked out the window at Missouri passing in the gray October light. I think that is what this country does. It finds the broken part. It fixes it. It writes the fix in a file so it can be found again. She paused. Where I come from we hid the broken parts. We pretended they weren't there until they weren't there anymore in a different way. She did not say anything else for a long time. Giovanna sat with it. She thought about the files and the Geneva Convention and Rinaldi saying the rule is the rule. She thought about the catalog she had left in the library with her name at the bottom of the last page. She thought about documentation as a form of faith, the belief that accuracy mattered, that things recorded were things that existed in a way that things unrecorded did not. She thought about her diary, about the Dante stamp copied inside it. We should sleep, Teresa said eventually. Yes, Giovanna said. They slept. New York arrived on the 3rd morning as the address of a family in Oklahoma who kept Dante for 40 years and gave it away. The recipe for a sauce from a woman in Newark I have never met. The memory of an old woman's hands. The knowledge that a gate can stand open not because no one thought to close it, but because no one needed to. That is what the land kept. That is what I am bringing home. She closed the diary. She put it in her coat pocket alongside everything else. She turned off the light and lay in the dark and listened to the Atlantic move beneath the ship. Enormous, patient, carrying them east toward whatever home had become in their absence. And she closed her eyes and let the ocean do what oceans do. Giovanna Bianchi returned to Milan in November 1945. The Biblioteca Ambrosiana was standing. She went back to work there in January 1946, cataloging what remained. She wrote to the Esposito family in December and received a reply in February. The correspondence continued for 11 years. Rosaria Conti returned to her village near Brescia. Her brother had stopped growing, but had not stopped living. She gave her sister the address Enzo had written on the kitchen paper. Her sister wrote to his mother in Newark. A package arrived in the spring of 1946, flour, dried tomatoes, a jar of preserved sauce sealed with wax. No explanation. Just the food. Teresa Marino never found Aldo. She immigrated legally to New Jersey in 1949. She found work as a bookkeeper in a hardware store in Newark. The owner's name was Romano. Lucia Trinini returned to Milan. She never spoke publicly about the camp. The Dante remained on her shelf until her death in 1987. Her granddaughter found it in the apartment afterward. The cover worn, the spine cracked, the Esposito stamp still legible on the front page. She did not know what it meant. She kept it anyway.